All right, good people, we're gonna go ahead and get started. If you wanna make your way on over, I'm going to invite to the stage to help me facilitate this conversation, this fireside chat, two colleagues and friends. The first is a leader within the NAACP, Tiffany D. Loftin, responsible for the Youth and College Division. And then we're also joined by Miss Lawrence, entrepreneur, actor, social justice champion, and slayer of all things fashion. I want to say thank you to Eris, to Derek Johnson, to the staff of the NAACP for making space for us to have this conversation. Thank all of you for being here. I know that we're recording this, so we will be sure to amplify this and share this with people who are not in this space. Before we start this conversation, I want to acknowledge that June was Pride Month. We would not have had Pride Month if it were not for Marsha P. Johnson. We wouldn't have many things if it weren't for Black women generally, but Marsha P. Johnson allowed us to get to the space where we could talk about Pride. Not all of us are able to celebrate it that way, but before we go on, I just want to ask for a moment of silence, acknowledging that we lost, as I know of, 12 Black trans women thus far this year. We lost one just yesterday. And here in Detroit, there was recently charges against a man for killing 2 Black gay men and 1 Black trans woman. So if we could just honor them with a moment of silence before we get into it, I would appreciate it. Thank you for that. So many of you know that this morning, the National Black Justice Coalition, which is the nation's only civil rights organization that is intentional and unapologetic in acknowledging that as long as there have been Black people, there have been Black LGBTQIA, and I use the term same gender loving people. We are proud to have partnered with NAACP to have launched the Gender Justice Toolkit. The impetus for this toolkit is not ours. Decades ago, Malcolm X said the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. And we know based on hate crime statistics that has not changed much, right? And so this toolkit is designed to increase conversations about the violence that Black women face, both trans and cis Black women, and to support us in having conversations about how we do better. And so what I want to do is first say happy belated birthday to Ms. Lawrence. It's celebrating her birthday October 13th, no? I just want to acknowledge you.
No, you better own it.
April, early October,
yes.
right.
Happy birthday.
And as Tiffany, right, just celebrate.
Mine's in April. You can tell me happy birthday
Tiffany too, right? You gotta celebrate joy. So after a moment like that, I want to celebrate a little joy. So you're gonna start the planning early. We're gonna get back to you later. Tiffany, how do you have conversations about violence and justice with your young women and girls, acknowledging the work that you do, the role that you have around youth in college? How do you want to respond to things that are going on in the world, right? Think about the last week and all of the attacks that y'all's president made on a group of Black women elected officials. How do you respond to it, and then what's your message to the babies?
So, I love that, to the babies. Y'all know David John's all about teaching the babies. Thank you for having me here, first of all, David, because not only is this conversation important for us to have, because we do this work often, but it's important for us to have this in public spaces so that folks can feel safe enough to be drawn towards a conversation where they don't always feel pigeonholed. And I know that not only does the NAACP, need to do better and have more spaces, we'll talk about in a little bit, but also other national organizations and other national spaces, political spaces, need to make it easily accessible for people to come and join us in these conversations and not just make it so that in the agenda you got to go to a room and that be just for you. In the corner, right, and then you have to out yourself because you're going to that space. Folks can come here and just be here, right, and be present. So thank you for leading in this way. So y'all know I'm the National Director for the Youth and College Division. Shout out to the Youth and College Division. And because it was the best division. And yes, I said that. And we've done this in a few ways in the last year. So I started this job last year in February, a little past a year now. There's really important ways that we need to tackle this issue when you come from an historically silent group of people who do civil rights work around LGBTQIA, SGL issues. And in a space, yep, I got that. So when you come in spaces like this, it's really important that you meet people where they're at, right? And not try to level set or neutralize the issue, but just expose people to things that they've never been exposed to before. And that comes with education. So for example, last year at convention, it was really important that we saw the agenda and we said, listen, there's no spaces where our folks can have conversations. What is the best mechanism for us to do that? Well, we know that the Black folks and the NAACP have a huge history with the Black church. This is not a church organization, but we have a huge history with it as a people. And so we said we're gonna have a faith and LGBTQIA, SGL intersectional conversation We had our alumni come back as a priest, a pastor from Atlanta, Sammy Dow, who came and moderated the discussion. We had the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. We had Planned Parenthood. We had a whole bunch of folks join us. Yep, that's why I said we worked with y'all earlier. And we had our folks come and sit into a small circle, right? And whoever wanted to come and listen to that fireside chat and just be a part of the discussion, they were able to come. Now, I'm gonna tell you the truth. We do our surveys. I'm not exaggerating, and I have it on the Google Doc right here. Literally, that was the most well-received and best attended workshop that we had. There are a lot of brothers and sisters walking around this convention in the closet because they feel like they can't come out of the NAACP. And so if you don't create the space for them, then we don't know what they want to talk about and where they can be. And so we said, okay, well, now we know that our folks are receptive to it. There was no violence that happened at the convention. The space was created and it was safe. What are the issues now that we can talk about, and how do we at least say something? And I'm gonna be honest with you, as an organizer, I've been wrestling with this because I was like, no, I don't want to just post on Instagram when somebody gets killed. And then I had to check myself, and I said, Tiffany, really it's about acknowledgement. When you don't post on social media and you don't say anything about somebody being killed, or you don't say anything about the violence, people take your silence as opposition, right? And I had to check myself because I was like, well, I want to do more than just post. You think others should just be posting. But it's actually really important that we share that. And then on the flip side, I can't continue to share trauma and violence without asking people to come to a space where they can heal, come together, celebrate, and create community together, right? And so we had trap yoga, we have things like Black therapists who come to our programs. We have folks that do what month was that? Mindfulness, yeah, but no, November was like, no, but it was November. It was March. March was meditation month or something like that. And so we did every Wednesday a Black Girls Mindfulness on social media, where like for 5 minutes out of your day, you can come and join Jessica, who's our therapist, and she would do a 5-minute meditation, and she would do it for different topics, right? And so I think that just, again, like the education and the pieces of acknowledging the violence and the trauma that's happening, speaking out and saying something about it is the first step, and then helping us take care of ourselves is the second. Now we have to move to, with the people that we have, the coalition of the willing, to now get to solutions.
Ms. Lawrence, Tiffany talked about the importance of safe spaces, especially among Black people. And she also talked about being disruptive, right? Showing up in spaces and having conversations that people aren't accustomed to having, showing up in ways that people are not accustomed to. And I'm thankful for you always showing up in your truth without apology and showing out.
Fabulous.
Right, literally. Can you talk a bit about why you think it's important for organizations like the NAACP to do this work? Why are you even here at this association, and what more do you want people to do?
Well, I'm thankful that I was asked to come here. I'm here because, as Tiffany said earlier, the NAACP has a long history with the Black church. And love, I believe, is where the Black church is where love began. And you know, while the NAACP's, one of their missions is to dismantle a lot of discrimination and hate centered around African Americans, I think there's a huge crisis with homophobia in the Black experience as well. So what better place to start with dismantling that than with the NAACP? It's important for me to be here in this space because the more we amalgamate together and have visible images of one another together, gay and straight, you know, I think that helps aid in this bifurcation that we have, this long-going bifurcation that we have in this vortex. And what I want to make clear, and I've said this before, the better we look all together, the more powerful we can become to really fight our oppressors in homophobia and in racial discrimination, because the force on the other side is much more stronger than it is within our community, make no mistakes about it. But what I said before also is that it hurts worse when it comes from our own people, because how can we grow and progress when all of these, you know, setbacks still exist within our own community?
I hear you saying what Fannie Lou Hamer taught us a long time ago, which is that unless and until all of us are free, none of us are free, right? So what do you say to folks, whether they're in the Black church, they're leading HBCUs, or they're connected to legacy civil rights organizations like the NAACP, who don't want to shift and who don't want to acknowledge that there are some of us that don't show up in traditional ways? What do you say to them?
Let's figure out why you don't want to show up. What is it that makes you uncomfortable? And something that Tiffany pinpointed is it all stems from education. And what I've learned through a healing process of becoming one with myself is that the reason our people refuse to fully acknowledge who people of the LGBTQ community, SG, all the letters, honey. You know, not to get away from the topic, but I have this whole thing that everybody thinks that it's better with a letter. Let's just call a thing, okay? I'm gay, and a lot of people, you know, I don't believe in you know, having to explain myself and explain all these different things, you know. Just respect me as a human being and love me as a spirit, you know. But what was your, because I got sidetracked a little bit.
That was important. Let's stay here for a second though, right? Because sometimes we do get caught up on words and terms, and some of it is the elders sometimes are just like, it's too many letters, y'all keep adding stuff, I just don't want to keep up, right? I use same gender loving because I work in policy spaces. Two of my colleagues from the National LGBTQ Task Force are here, and gay is often used to signal things that are important to white people, right?
Right.
So civil union was really important. Now they're pushing conversion therapy. And for me, it's important, and we have this campaign that we're involved in with them called All of Me, All of the Time, because most black folks, when we invite people in, I don't like the term coming out, when we invite people in, we don't move to neighborhoods like Hollywood, California, or Boys Town, Chicago. We live with other black people. We live in the South, in states where it's legal to discriminate against us, where you can be denied access to housing and employment. And so for me, it is important. Those are spaces where you are denied access to housing. That's exactly right. It's important to name things, right? But where we were earlier is, what do you say to people who don't want to shift? And you started by saying, help me understand why you're uncomfortable and what you don't want to do.
Right. You know, people don't want to shift because they don't know the history. I said this backstage talking to Tiffany that I believe a lot of homophobia, a lot of rape. We're dealing with a lot of that right now. It just is in where we are in the social realm. I think a lot of it is stemmed from slavery. You know, back when our slave masters used to rape our black men and our women, but it was the men who could not say anything about it because it was not only to humanize them, but it was emasculating as well. And so I believe that's where a level of hatred began as it relates to homophobia. And then, to homosexuality, and then the hatred came behind it. You know, I can't share with my wife what happened to me, or I can't share with my partner what happened to me, or I can't share with my wife that I may have feelings for another man because, you know, it would be condemned. You know, and that's what the way, and our masters taught that to our slaves from the first book they allowed us to read, which was the Bible. And so I believe if we go back and really study who we are and where we come from, I think a lot of healing will happen. I had to do that personally. I went a very long time not having a relationship with my heterosexual black brothers because they didn't understand me and I didn't understand why they didn't understand me. But through soul searching and reading and prayer especially, I learned it's not their fault, it's in their blood. They don't know better. So I took the plight to say, you know what, let me start educating whenever I can use my platform and open my mouth. Let me explain to the people where this come from and why you're wrong. And I feel like if we continue to do more of that in these type of spaces, if we take it a step further and use all of our allies and the different allyship organizations and bring that to actual education that's taught in school, literally going back and rewriting history so that when we have little young boys like a Nigel Shelby who committed suicide, I believe he was in middle school, 15 years old, he was in his early years of high school, he would have somewhere been able to read that there are people like me who exist and we are here because we belong and we're here to aid in a better world. Nobody's taught that at school. I wasn't taught that. Luckily, you know, I grew up in a family that never put their mouths on me or never ostracized me. So I don't have a coming out story. I've always had a meeting of the mind story. And what that did for me was it allowed me to go out into the world and meet it on my own terms. But going back, I didn't learn that in school. it's never taught. And I mean, and children spend more time away at school than they do in the households. And if you're in a household with very, traditional thinking parents, you're not going to be taught that as well. So what happens is we grow up, and this is where, mental illness starts to develop. This is where depression develops and all of these types of things. So I think it's this is the epicenter of where we can really start to further shift these conversations.
I appreciate you naming my brother, Nigel Shelby. Some of you know that I spent a lot of time with his mom, Kamika. And what we do know is that school was a terrorizing place for Nigel. And that is true for many Black LGBTQ kids, really any kid who is not white, cis, heterosexual, able-bodied. And to that point, the Congressional Black Caucus recently established an emergency task force on Black youth mental health and suicide to acknowledge this very issue, that we are sending our babies into toxic spaces. We're not equipping them with the history, their language, their culture, a love of self that allows them to be resilient. And too many of our babies think that the only way to get through is to die by suicide. And so I want us to be clear that this is not just rhetoric, this is not about language, but it is about being able to show up in your full self and otherwise receive love. Tiffany, what more work needs to happen in spaces where our babies are forced to move through? How are you thinking about working with schools or otherwise leveraging your leadership to ensure that our babies move through spaces protected?
Well, can I go back 2 seconds and then I'm going to answer that. So, David, when I met you, there was one thing that you were posting on social media that you might have said more than a dozen times. I think repetition is key for people, and I definitely swallowed this as a way to really challenge myself and also push the narrative with other people. Is something to what Ms. Lawrence just said, which is LGBTQIA, SGL, and everybody else was existing way back then, right? But the reason why some folks are now wrestling with it in different ways is because of social media and the narratives that media is able to portray and create. And the restrictions also in that too, because they also don't always do it in a great way, but then sometimes they restrict it, right? And so that there's a way that people have to think about how the Black diaspora was more than just Black slaves from Africa coming to America, but that there were actual intersectionalities and diversity on those boats, right? They were coming over as well, and then when we got here, those slaves were also diverse, right? And then when we came out of slavery, we were still diverse, and those people never not existed, right? But that we just didn't talk about them as often. And they didn't acknowledge it. And so that wrestles with me, because I'm like, oh, where are these gay people coming from? Like, nobody should be saying that, because they've been around forever, right? We've all been around forever.
This whole new thing I've been seeing, this is an agenda. There's an agenda.
I say that all the time.
I hate that.
If you have seen the agenda given to me, I want the cliff notes, I want the citation.
What is the agenda?
Right. There's that, and then there's also, and you talk about constricting, this is why you showing up on TV is so important, right? Because it exposes us to things that we otherwise are taught to think that it doesn't naturally exist, right?
Right.
So I do want to talk about that and why that's been important.
And shifting and shaping the narrative around that.
That's exactly
we're not going to move on to that yet. You want to ask me a question. So it's for me as a director of this space, my job is to make space, right? As a straight heterosexual woman, my privilege is, in this job, I get to pick, choose, and create spaces and invite talented people and speakers and leaders and resources and pour into those spaces to which otherwise other folks would be either ignorant to or wouldn't think about. And I have the corrective lens where I have to think about that, because I know which community I come from and I know who my friends are, right? And I know who's holding me accountable in my work. We hold each other accountable in our work, right? So if something's not happening at the convention, I'm gonna get a text or a phone call from David like, what is that, miss? Like, and I have to, because this is my brother, I'm responding and I'm accountable to that in these spaces. So because of that responsibility, there's a few ways. One, this is the space here. How do we take it a step further, where we're going to the board of directors, right? How do we take it a step further? And people, let me pause. People always go to the national NAACP, the national board of directors, but you and I were talking about this when we were walking. We have over 2,200 units, chapters across the entire country, right? So we're in spaces where we see people, like Detroit just had 2 killings for people who were trans here in the last 2 weeks. people that are local here can take their responsibility and have to be active as well. It's not all on the national. Now, I'm not taking national off the hook because I work at national. I'm just saying that there's more ways in this bureaucracy that we need to target and push. We have to have a panel on this, right? That's actually in a constructive space. We are on the agenda here, but how do we make sure that that's in a space and on the agenda for the actual convention and for everybody that's, you said Ms. Lawrence, right?
I think also a good idea too, while you guys work, with the NAACP and the National Black Justice Coalition. One thing that I absolutely hate when I'm always scrolling through my timeline and down the feeds of social media, there is such a very small response in hashtags as it relates to a trans person's death, opposed to when there is a Trayvon Martin, a Nipsey Hussle, a Eric Gardner. There's an overflood. Even from my gay brothers and sisters, we overflood. We make sure that we speak their names. But when it comes time, when the time comes for our names to be spoken, we are as a whole, very, very lackluster. So I would ask a favor of people like the NAACP, the people like the National Action Network, the National Black Justice, let's reach out to the powers that be at these, big level social media companies like the Shade Room, the Baller Alerts, the TMZs, and all that. Say, listen, when we send you content that this happened, we need you to post it. I really doubt if they will tell you no. They're not going to post it on their own because again, most of them, I believe, suffer from their own insecurities about those issues. But I seriously doubt if the head of the NAACP contacts the Shade Room or the Ball Alert or the TMZs or the Hollywood Reporter and say, listen, there are 2 trans murders that just happened in Detroit. I need you to make sure that this gets as much attention as possible, just like you just did last week with Nipsey Hussle. Can you do that for us?
So the first thing is, you don't know what you don't know. And then I've had to wrestle with people in my family and in my circles who don't follow David Johns, right? People don't follow the National Black Justice Coalition. People don't follow you on social media. People don't follow what you see and what type of attention you'll respond to are the things that you allow in your space and in your mindset, right? If you're not following those pages, you're not going to get the information. And if you're not following those pages, it's not a judgment of you. It's to say, are you expanding how you define and understand solidarity in the Black diaspora in the first place? Because if you don't have a clear definition for what solidarity looks like for Black folks, and your Black folks is just about one type of Black folk, right? Not immigrants, not folks with disabilities, not folks who are LGBTQIA+, not people who are, don't speak English, whatever those situations might be, then you're narrowing yourself to a very small percentage of Blackness. And that's not what Black power, Black solidarity, Black Lives Matter, none of those things means that. It means all of the Blackness. So that's one. And I think that, in the case in which we need to continue to push and promote the killings that are taking place that are happening, my then question becomes, we want this to be widely felt, but I want this to be deeply felt, right? And if people don't, and if people don't deeply feel it, then they're less likely to respond to coming out, right? And supporting the advocacy that needs to happen to stop it in the first place. One more plug. Here at convention, just so folks know, on Monday from 2:30 to 4:30, the Youth and College Division is having a workshop. It's a strategy session, so they're different from workshops. The strategy session is 2 hours long, and it is a session with experts from different intersectionalities of the Black diaspora. Brother David Johns will be there. We have Yonazda from the Native American community. We have the Nation of Islam and the hip hop community, and we also have the undocumented community. And that strategy session is for folks to come and learn, how do you strategize when you're working on campaigns at the intersections of Blackness? So I hope that y'all will join us for conversation.
I want to go back to a point that Ms. Lawrence made about why we need to stand better together, right? And the point is this. It's funny, my brother just came in because we were in Alabama months ago for our sister who experienced the beginning stages of rape at a Waffle House. And what Shakisha has said is that if she were dead, more people would care about what happened to her than her existing as a Black woman whose life has been irreparably changed as a result of this. People aren't talking about what happened. She goes to court by herself. Every time she goes to court, they push the court date.
She has hella fines.
She has all kinds of fines that people have been paying for. Again, her life has been changed. dramatically, and everybody else, the police officers, the people at Waffle House who called her out of her name, they've gone on about their business. And sometimes what happens is when we offer these things up, Avery Thompson is a black trans man who was just raped by somebody who is a U.S. Marshal, military marshal. And we sent that story around to folks who were like, thank you for the information, but they didn't publish it. This is why we need to stand better together. This is why all of us need to participate in the census so that we have better numbers about where we are in our community, so we have resources so that we're not always asking people to do things for us. The last thing I want to do, just to make this actionable, if you will go onto your social media website and use the hashtag #IamNigelShelby, or Nigel Shelby means Trayvon Martin too, it'll help to amplify. One of the things that we've had a challenging time doing is exactly what Ms. Lauren said, which is highlight for people that if you love Trayvon Martin and it bothered you to know that that boy's life was taken and there was no justice that was given, you should be as mad and upset about what happened to our brother Nigel Shelby.
Or Malaysia Booker.
Any of them, right? We have to do this. I know there are people here, if you guys have questions, I want to allow space for that. But Ms. Lawrence, will you talk about what it's meant for you to play Miss Bruce?
So what it has meant for me to play Miss Bruce when I was on Star, I have to say that was one of the most rewarding jobs ever, because I was able to play a gender non-conforming character who mirrored a lot of who I was and who I grew up in. That we were totally separate as it relates to imagery, honey. With the fashion and all of that, they're two different people. But at core, they mirror one another. Growing up, I was infatuated with television shows. I loved a sitcom, I loved jingles. I'm a musical person, and so jingles always stood out to me. And one show in particular that I always think about when I would walk on set at Star and play and get into character as Miss Bruce was the show The Jeffersons. And the theme song was Moving On Up to the East Side, to a deluxe apartment. Moving on up to a deluxe apartment, to the East Side. Yeah. But the piece of that song was, we finally got a piece of the pie. And that is a very, very proud feeling when I listen to that song and I would watch that show. When I step on the set of Star and I'm there with a major network or a huge network like Fox, and I'm being celebrated and I'm being honored and I'm being paid, as myself, as someone who's like me and looks like me, I felt like I finally got a piece of the pie. What's more important than that, because it's not about me, is that we were able, Lee Daniels was able to further push conversations in the homes where people are watching the show and people can say, oh my God, that looks like me, that I am that person, And I think that the response that I've gotten from it, one guy in particular walked up to me, I was somewhere, and he said, I just want to thank you for your character, Miss Bruce, and the show Star. Because of you, I was able to have a conversation with my father, who I had not talked to in 20 years. And that did so much for me, and it let me know that so much more of that has to be done. We can sit here, we can talk all day, we can go to these conventions and, occupy these very smart spaces with brilliant collegiate people, honey. But to show up in households where people get to mirror themselves and you tell stories that people are familiar with, I think really, really helps push healing.
It is one of the reasons for, if anybody is not watching Pose, you should. But the penultimate episode, Never Knew Love, Angelica Ross, who was here last year, who was on the LGBTQ town hall, did a phenomenal job lifting up stories of members of our community that are often untold. And so we have to leverage moments like this and platforms like that in order to have these conversations. Before we open it up, Tiffany, I want to go back to where we started, which is to acknowledge that we launched this Gender Justice Toolkit with the NAACP with the endorsement of the task force and others to talk about the violence against Black women, against cis and trans. When we say all Black women, we mean all Black women. What's your ask from the brothers? What more should we be doing, cis, trans, hetero, homo. What do the men need to be doing in order to show up better with and for our sisters?
You want to know why I just made that face? Because I was in a next gen training yesterday with somewhere between like 200 and 300 young people, and a young black man asked me that exact same question yesterday. So to have that consecutively is just a little transformational for me at the NAACP.
Because you're not asked that often?
No, of course not. And because I've been doing national organizing for the last 8 years, and I think I've heard it more yesterday and today than I have in the last 8 years of me organizing. It is problematic, but it's special in that moment. So thank you for asking. I'm gonna tell you what I told the brother yesterday, which is in a lot of spaces, and I know my sisters feel valued, but not always respected. And so the difference between that is we know that our talent and our strength and our leadership is valued, but we don't always feel respected for having it, or respected for being able to give the space to continue to lead, right, in ways that we know we can or that we should be, because folks don't move out the way. My ask to, look, a lot of people, yep, women, am I right? Okay. So everybody's saying, yeah,
I really said amen.
Amen, all my ladies.
Ashe and amen.
So I think my ask is, with that in mind, in spaces where men have said, no, let's let the ladies speak, or no, we need a woman to do the notes, or we need a woman to help with the events planning, or we need a woman to help with, being on the set, whatever the situation, whatever the ask might be. We need men now to just challenge other men. I don't need men to tell me, hey, let's make space, hey, let's, have her on the agenda, hey, make a good, we don't need that, right? That has not been helpful. What's been helpful is when men tell other men, hey, yo, don't do that. Or if I'm getting catcalled every day in Washington, D.C., and other black men see it happening and they don't say anything, I don't need them to tell me, you're beautiful, sweetheart, have a better day. I need you to go follow that dude that just called me the BITCH and talk to him. You know what I'm saying? I shouldn't have to stand in the gap of where violence exists. So I need men to check other men now. I don't need men to make space for them.
I appreciate that. I hear you say, use our privilege for good, right? To show up and be disruptive. Amen to that. We go, yeah, you got some amen. This beautiful sister here has a microphone in her hand. If you have a question for Ms. Lawrence and want to make an intervention, please do so. Victoria, why don't you tell them a little bit about the organization and about the campaign that we're working on together to get us started.
Hey everybody, Victoria Kerber York. I work with the National LGBTQ Task Force, the nation's oldest LGBTQ advocacy organization. And just gotta put a plug in for the org, because it hasn't always been this way. So while it is true, I'm gonna say it, the largest demographic at our organization is black women, period. White people, Latinx people, period. The largest demographic at our organization right now are black women. And it's important as a black woman in leadership to note that, because the LGBTQ movement has not been known to look like that. So I'm excited to be able to partner with NBJC, the National Black Justice Coalition, under David's phenomenal leadership, on a campaign called All of Me, All the Time. And so much of what you all have talked about today underscores why we need an effort like this. It talks about being able to center the reality that if we say we want civil rights protections for all black people, it needs to include LGBTQIA, cisgender-loving black people too. And that when we talk about Bayard Rustin, when we talk about Polly Murray, folks who without their leadership, we would not have had the March on Washington in 1963, and we would not have had Brown versus Board of Education, because Thurgood Marshall and everybody said they got their legal theory from Polly Murray, a genderqueer woman who's also in a same-gender-loving relationship. And so the fact that they fought so hard, and the protections they fought so hard for didn't include them, pains me, and it pains their legacy. And I do this work in honor of their legacy, but also in honor for the children, like my 2-year-old daughter, who I hope don't have to make survival decisions every single day of her life about how much of a woman is she gonna be, how gay if she does come out to be gay, is she gonna be, how does she code switch, at what moments does she drop where she got her degree, all to survive, which is something that black folks have come to know, and LGBTQ people have come to know much more. So some of the points that Tiffany raised around taking this work to the next level. It's historic that you've got the NAACP, the National Urban League, and LULAC, all within 3 weeks of each other, creating space for LGBTQ folks at their conventions with receptions, workshops, conversations like this. But that next step is around chapter engagement, right, at these organizations. It is around the work at the board of directors level as well, but definitely more deeply felt at the chapter levels, right? And being able to give and provide resources so that organizations who do civil rights work are doing it with this particular lens. So the All of Me campaign, All of Me All the Time campaign is going to be an opportunity to be able to figure out from our partners at these legacy civil rights organizations how we can do it in tandem. How do we bring our intersectional policy folks in relationship with y'all intersectional policy folks to be able to look at our organizing, our advocacy, our administration and structures to make sure all of it includes all of us all the time.
And you, again, that's the National LGBTQ Task Force, and there's also information on our website, nbjc.org. Any of the babies have a question? Shout out to the babies in the college division. I talk kindergarten, third grade, I'll call young people babies, they get offended and I
Yeah, don't
care.
get offended. He calls everybody babies, but they're almost 30. Don't do that.
I understand, they still somebody's baby. Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm from Miami.
Hey, Miami.
You know, with the struggle of being black and with the struggle of the transgender and gay and stuff, do you feel like sometimes it seems like their rights get more chunked over the rights of our civil liberties? And I know that there's a lot of things that's happened with transgender more so now, but do you feel like, being that this is something that we've been fighting for so long and it seems like even Jim Crow is just getting more stronger, it's like, are we so far with that?
I hear you saying, I want to make sure that I hear you first, that there's been a lot of energy invested in LGBTQ advocacy, in particular white LGBTQ advocacy, and there's been a lot of attention paid to white trans people, mostly women.
Right.
And your question is that overshadowing the black movement for civil liberties and civil rights?
Right.
A part of that is true, right? Which is that yes, white queer people have a lot to celebrate. And they have a lot to celebrate because of the activism that we've been talking about, the work that black people, black women, black queer women have been doing. But what happens when we think about the world as gay and black is that you miss some of us. You miss the reality that there are civil liberties that we fought for, that were inscribed in laws, that were codified 63, 64, and 65, that do not include us based on sexual identity, gender expression, or gender orientation. And so black folks sometimes take for granted that we can show up in spaces and be accommodated in public. The reality is that if you are black and lesbian, gay, transgender, queer, or people think you are, they can deny you access to restaurants, hotels, right? So we are still having those fights. That's why our organization
And that
is
actually won't garner any type of attention if you are from the black space and gay. It's very separate, which is another reason why I plead with my straight brothers and sisters in allyship, because a lot of us, we out here by ourselves. When you talk about policymakers and lawmakers, and when they have this LGBTQIA, all of these things and their agendas, we're not on their mind when they're thinking about these things.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
We're not on their mind when they're thinking about these things. And I say that from experience. There have been areas of people that have run for office that I've paid very close attention to when it came to going around speaking to everybody. I want to make sure that you come around and you speak to people that look like me, that are like me in my community, not just the black community, in the black gay community, because it's very separate from the white gay community, and a lot of them fail to do so. A lot of them feel like if they run out to these pride parades and wave a rainbow flag, honey, that wasn't intended for the black gay community, that they've done their part in adding to the equality conversation, and that's just not the case. It's not true. So we actually don't what you're asking is not, we don't get more privileges or more attention than you guys do from a black gay space.
And the way to think about this too is that the Supreme Court recently ruled on a cake shop case. It was called the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. For most white LGBTQ people who can go to work and draw power from being queer and wear rainbows and all that other stuff, it was literally about the ability to have somebody make a cake for them. For us, it was about care. It was about the ability to show up in places and be cared for in ways that most white people take for granted. So there's still a lot more work to be done. Sister, I want to get your question in before we wrap. Can we take this question and this one and then we'll wrap?
Good afternoon. My name is Giselle Hunt. I'm a writer for The Crisis Magazine. Hey, I'm glad you all are doing this panel. I'm glad to be here, so thank you for it. My question, Tiffany kind of touched upon it a little earlier, but what sort of changes have you seen within the NAACP and other civil rights organizations that you work alongside, especially now in the last couple of years that the NAACP has taken a stand on LGBTQI issues and has been very vocal about saying these are our people too. Have you noticed any changes within the organizations, like, boots on the ground within chapters, that have seemed to come from top down?
Before you answer, let's take this one as well, and then we'll respond to both as we close.
Hi everyone, my name is Nyla Wilson. I am a volunteer for the NAACP Youth Conference. Thank you. My question can be answered by anyone, but what I want to know is what can be done to create more education, experiences, images, and media for our youth, for the children, so that they can see Black LGBTQIA images on TV, so we can have these conversations with the babies, right? So that they can go through school and learn what they need to and have cartoons or characters or people they can relate to and learn about people like Marsha P. Johnson, who without her, honestly, I don't think we would have this space.
Perfect questions. I love it too as I look at this Wakanda display over here. Tiffany, what has happened, boots on the ground, demonstrable change that we've seen? And then Ms. Lawrence, what more should we be doing to expose the baby to the beauty of our diversity?
The first thing that has happened, you said in the last few years, which is very evident, is that if organizations don't move, they get the pressure to move, right? And that's not from the inside, that's from the outside coming in. That we cannot continue to ignore what young Black millennials, what young Black next generation Z folks are actually talking about and discussing what they care about, because what they're demanding is not just that they get to fight for it on their own, but that other national civil rights organizations like us and like others have to actually meet them at the table and join them, right, in solidarity in pushing forward those issues. I don't think we would have this space if it wasn't for that type of pressure, honestly. So that's one. And then two is, what we have seen is that individuals and youth units, so our units are called our chapters, are actually taking stances and passing resolutions on the local level, right, that is swelling over the entire country. So I don't want to ignore and say the NAACP doesn't do anything about LGBTQIA, SGL issues, but I do want to acknowledge that there are real folks who identify with the community and who are allies within the for the community, who are taking stances on the local level to push that work. So where you might not see on the national level, CNN or MSNBC talking about an issue, you'll see, the youth council for the Detroit Youth Council coming out and posting something and saying something or holding a candlelight vigil. For Nelby, we did a candlelight vigil, right? Our students and our youth are gonna say, listen, we're not gonna wait for you to give us permission to show up and for us to be okay advocating for what's right, but we're gonna just do it on our own. And in the NAACP, folks, don't know this, that the adults and the youth have the exact same privileges, the exact same voting power, the exact same agency. So we actually don't need permission to do anything. So it's the pressure from the outside that's changed. I think it's gotten tougher for people to ignore, right, these type of issues. And two, our local folks on the ground are actually doing things on their own to take care of themselves and to bring acknowledgement and education to their community.
Yeah, so to answer your question, like what Tiffany said, we're not waiting. Nobody's waiting anymore on anybody to give us a job. I was blessed and very fortunate to catch the attention of Lee Daniels and actually Andy Cohen, who I credit him as my founding television father, Andy Cohen. But 10 years ago, we didn't have Lena Waithe. We didn't have,
right.
we didn't have We had Lee Daniels, but we didn't have Lee Daniels in the way that we have him today. Unapologetically telling our stories and hiring black gay talent like a Jesse Smollett, like myself, like an Amaya Scott. You know, we didn't have Ryan Murphy from Pose to tell our stories. We didn't have that. So we're making strides, and we're definitely making progress. Myself personally, I'm in the process right now, taking it even a step further, and I'm creating my own stories that I now, since I have this opportunity in this space that I'm in, to go and sit in front of executives and say, here's more great stories of my community and what my people are like. Obviously, because of the overwhelming response from our stories, you see that people are interested and in tune to it. So let's do more of it. And I would say, let's create more black gay writers. Let's figure out and identify more black gay directors, ones we haven't heard of but have the talent. And let's support them, let's center around them, let's praise them, and get more work done that way.
This moment right here, right now, is evidence of the work that has been done so we could be here. And you all being here is affirming and acknowledging that we won't have to go at this alone. I want you to join me in thanking Tiffany D. Loftin for all that she's done, all that she's doing. Please also thank Ms. Lawrence for all that he continues to do, entrepreneur extraordinaire. Please download and use the Gender Justice Toolkit. You can find it on our website. You should be following the crisis. There's a lot that they're sharing as well. Partner with the task force. And whatever, if you have questions, let us know. Know that there are resources that we want to be helpful. The last thing that I'll ask you all to do is look up Chiquisha Clemens, find her on her social media, find a way to support her, and then do the same for our brother Nigel. Again, use the hashtag #IamNigelShelby so that we can all one day soon get free. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing this space with us. Thank you, Eris, for making space. Thank you, NAACP.